Some children remember their first words. Tawia remembered his last, spoken seconds before the world turned into breaking glass and screaming metal. 2 years of silence followed, until the day his mother started working in a mansion in Hancock Park, and he saw the man with the scar. The man who didn't recognize him. The man whose heartbeat he'd memorized during 4 minutes of chaos in a South LA apartment building. Kwang Ho runs a criminal empire built on control and calculated distance. He doesn't lose sleep over collateral damage. But when a mute 3-year-old begins following him through his own home, standing outside his office door, watching him with recognition that shouldn't exist, something cracks. This isn't a story about forgiveness. It's about what happens when you finally see the harm you never bothered to count. Hit subscribe now, because what you're about to witness will redefine everything you thought you knew about redemption. The toy car hit the marble floor with a sharp crack that made Monica's breath catch. She turned from the kitchen counter where she'd been preparing Kwang Ho's evening tea, her body already moving toward the hallway before her mind fully processed the sound. Tawia stood frozen at the base of the grand staircase, his small hand still extended from where he dropped the car, his dark eyes locked on someone, at the top of the stairs. Kwang Ho descended slowly, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled in rapid Korean. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing the thin scar that ran across his right palm. Monica had noticed it her first day of work, when he'd signed her employment contract. She'd noticed everything about him that day, the way he moved through rooms like he owned the air itself, the way his staff straightened their spines when he passed, the complete absence of warmth in his eyes when he looked at her son and said, "The child stays in your quarters." Now, 3 weeks later, that child wouldn't stay anywhere except wherever Kwang Ho was. "Tawia," Monica whispered, reaching for her son's shoulder. "Come away from there." The boy didn't move. His gaze tracked Kwang Ho's descent with an intensity that made Monica's stomach tighten. It was the same look he'd had since the first morning, when he'd wandered from the servants' wing and found Kwang Ho eating breakfast alone in the dining room. The staff had laughed nervously when they found the toddler standing 3 feet from the table, just watching. Kwang Ho had looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from irritation to something Monica couldn't identify, discomfort, maybe, or confusion. "Remove him," he'd said, and Monica had, apologizing in her careful, formal English while Tawia remained silent and pliant in her arms. But the following happened again that afternoon, and the next morning, and every day since. Kwang Ho reached the bottom of the staircase and ended his call without looking at the child who stood less than 2 feet away. He moved toward his office, his footsteps precise against the marble, and Tawia followed. Not running, not playing, just following, his bare feet making no sound at all. Monica's hands twisted in her apron. "I'm sorry, Mr. Park. I'll take him. Leave it." Kwang Ho's voice was clipped, distracted. He disappeared into his office, and before Monica could catch him, Tawia settled onto the floor directly outside the closed door, his back against the wall, his knees drawn to his chest. Mrs. Chin, the head housekeeper, appeared beside Monica with a sympathetic click of her tongue. She was a Taiwanese woman in her 60s who'd worked for the Park family for 15 years and had seen 3 generations of violence disguised as business. "He's been like this all week," she murmured in Mandarin, which Monica had started learning from her. Mr. Park pretends not to notice, but yesterday he left the door open. Just a crack. Monica's throat tightened. "I don't understand it." Tawia doesn't. He doesn't attach to people. Not since. She stopped herself. Mrs. Chin knew some of it, the selective mutism, the trauma responses, the 2 years of therapy that had produced minimal progress. But she didn't know about the night that had broken her son's voice. Nobody here knew that. Children sense things, Mrs. Chin said quietly. Things we adults work very hard to forget. Inside the office, Kwang Ho's voice rose slightly, speaking to someone on speakerphone. Monica recognized the tone. It was the same one he used when discussing what the staff euphemistically called business matters. Sharp. Authoritative. Final. Outside the door, Tawia's small body went rigid. Monica moved fast, but not fast enough. By the time she knelt beside her son, his breathing had already turned shallow and rapid, his eyes wide and unfocused, his hands clenched into fists against his chest. She knew this response. She'd seen it dozens of times over the past 2 years, triggered by sirens, by shouting, by the sharp crack of anything that sounded like breaking glass. "Baby, look at me," she whispered, her hands hovering near his face without touching. Touch made it worse during the episodes. "Tawia, Mama's here. You're safe. The office door opened. Kwang Ho stood in the doorway, his phone still in his hand, his expression shifting from irritation to something else as he registered the scene. The child on the floor, hyperventilating. The mother, helpless beside him. What's wrong with him? His voice had lost its sharp edge. He'll be fine in a moment. Monica's own voice shook. She hated this, hated the exposure of her son's vulnerability in front of this man who controlled everything in this house, who could fire her with a word, who could decide that a traumatized child was too much disruption for his pristine marble floors and his criminal empire meetings. Kwang Ho crouched slowly, his movements careful in a way Monica had never seen from him. He was always controlled, always precise, but this was different. This was deliberate gentleness, as if he were approaching something breakable. "Can he hear me?" he asked. "I don't know. Sometimes. It depends on Tawia." Kwang Ho's voice was low, steady, completely stripped of the authority he'd been wielding moments before. "Your mother is right here. You're in my house. Nothing is breaking. No one is shouting anymore." The toddler's breathing hitched. His eyes, still wide and unfocused, shifted slightly toward the sound of Kwang Ho's voice. "That's it," Kwang Ho continued, and Monica watched in shock as he lowered himself fully to the floor, sitting cross-legged in his expensive black slacks on the marble hallway. "Listen to my voice. In, out, in, out." He was demonstrating breathing, his chest rising and falling in an exaggerated rhythm. Monica had tried this 100 times with minimal success. But Tawia's eyes were tracking now, following the movement, and his own breathing was starting to slow, trying to match. Kwang Ho extended his right hand, palm up, the scar visible. He didn't reach for the child, he just held the position, waiting. Tawia's breathing steadied. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then, with a movement so slow Monica almost didn't register it, her son reached out and pressed his small palm against Kwang Ho's scarred one. The contact lasted 3 seconds. Then Tawia pulled back, tucked his hand against his chest, and his breathing normalized completely. Monica's eyes burned. In 2 years of therapy, of specialists, of trying everything the free clinic could offer, she had never seen her son respond to someone like this. Never. Kwang Ho stood smoothly, his face unreadable again. He looked at Monica, and she couldn't decipher the expression there. Confusion, certainly, but something else. Something almost like discomfort. "Keep him out of the hallways during business calls," he said, his voice returning to its usual clip. Then he turned and walked back into his office, closing the door with a soft click. Monica gathered Tawia into her arms, feeling his small heartbeat against her chest, steady now. Mrs. Chin had disappeared, giving them privacy, and Monica was grateful because tears were sliding down her face and she couldn't stop them. "What was that, baby?" she whispered into her son's hair. "What do you see in him?" Tawia, as always, said nothing. but his hand was still pressed against his own chest, right over his heart, as if protecting something precious there. That night, after Tawia was asleep in their small room in the servants' wing, Monica stood at the narrow window that overlooked the garden and tried to make sense of what she'd witnessed. 3 years in Los Angeles, and she'd learned to read danger in the way men moved, the way they spoke, the way they looked at women like her, immigrant, foreign, alone. Kwang Ho was dangerous. Everyone in the house knew it. The way his associates arrived at odd hours. The way certain rooms were always locked. The way Mrs. Chin never questioned the occasional red stains on expensive shirts that went directly to the incinerator rather than the laundry. But Tawia didn't see danger. Tawia saw something else. Monica's phone buzzed. A text from her sister in Accra. Asterisk, have you found a better job yet? That place sounds wrong. Asterisk. She didn't respond. Better jobs didn't pay enough to cover Tawia's therapy. Better jobs didn't come with health insurance. Better jobs didn't exist for women whose work visas were tied to specific employers, whose education credentials weren't recognized here, whose options narrowed to cleaning houses or nothing at all. The door to the main house opened below, spilling light across the garden. Monica watched as Kwang Ho emerged, followed by 2 men in dark suits. They spoke in low voices Korean, which Monica was slowly learning to recognize, if not understand. One of the men gestured sharply, his voice rising. Kwang Ho's response was quiet, but the other man stepped back as if struck. Power dynamics, Monica thought. Everything in this house was about power dynamics, except for what had happened in the hallway today. That had been something else entirely. The next morning brought Yuri Sien. Monica was wiping down the kitchen counters when the front door opened and a woman in a white Chanel suit entered, as if she'd personally commissioned the house's construction. She was stunning in the way that required both genetics and money, sharp cheekbones, perfect posture, eyes that assessed everything's value in a single glance. Mrs. Chin appeared immediately, bowing. Miss Sien, we weren't expecting you until this afternoon. Plans changed. Yuri's English was perfect, barely accented. Her gaze swept the foyer and landed on Monica with the kind of look that suggested she was cataloging and dismissing her simultaneously. Where is Kwang Ho? Mr. Park is in his office. I'll show myself in. Yuri moved past Mrs. Chin like she was furniture, her heels clicking against the marble. Mrs. Chin caught Monica's eye and mouthed a single word in Mandarin. Careful. Monica didn't need the warning. She'd heard about Yuri Sien from the other staff, Kwang Ho's fiancée, daughter of a Los Angeles city councilman, political alliance disguised as a relationship. She visited twice a week, stayed for exactly 90 minutes, and treated the staff like they were slightly unfortunate pieces of decor. Monica returned to the kitchen, but 10 minutes later, Yuri's voice carried from the office, sharp and demanding. Then Kwang Ho's, lower but firm. Then silence. Tawia, who'd been playing quietly in the corner of the kitchen with his toy car, stood up and walked toward the office hallway. No, baby. Monica moved to intercept him, but he sidestepped her with surprising agility and continued walking. She followed, anxiety spiking, and found him settling into his usual spot outside Kwang Ho's office door. Inside, the voices had resumed. Yuri's was clearer now. Don't understand why you keep them here. The optics are terrible. The optics of what? Kwang Ho sounded tired. A foreign maid with a bastard child living in your house? While we're trying to build political connections. My father already questions your judgment. Your father questions everything. Don't be flippant. This matters. You matter. Our future matters, and I won't have it compromised by. The door opened suddenly. Yuri stood in the threshold, her expression frozen between anger and surprise as she registered Tawia sitting against the wall. Her eyes narrowed. What is that child doing here? Monica rushed forward. I'm so sorry, I'll take him. He's not hurting anything, Kwang Ho said from inside the office. He appeared behind Yuri, his expression neutral, but his voice carrying an edge Monica had learned to recognize. Leave it alone. Leave it. Yuri turned to face him. Kwang Ho, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're too permissive. The staff should know their place, and their children should definitely know. Their place? Monica's voice cut through before she could stop herself. Both Kwang Ho and Yuri turned to look at her, and she felt her heart hammer against her ribs, but the words kept coming. My son is 3 years old. He's not staging a revolution by sitting in a hallway. The silence that followed was absolute. Yuri's face transformed into something cold and sharp. How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea? That's enough. Kwang Ho's voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Yuri mid-sentence. He looked at Monica with an expression she couldn't read. Take Tawiya to the garden. Give us the room. Monica scooped up her son, who'd remained silent and watching throughout the entire exchange, and retreated, her hands shaking. She'd just talked back to Kwang Ho's fiancé. She'd just guaranteed her own firing. 3 years of struggling, of saving, of trying to build something stable for Tawiya, and she'd thrown it away because she couldn't control her mouth. In the garden, she set Tawiya down on a bench and pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe. From the house, she could hear Yuri's voice rising again, then the definitive sound of the front door slamming. Footsteps approached across the grass. Monica looked up to find Kwang Ho standing 5 feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable as always. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I shouldn't have spoken that way. It won't happen again. If you need me to leave, you're not fired. The words hung in the air between them. I'm not? No. He glanced at Tawiya, who was watching him with that same intense, unwavering focus. But I need to understand something. Why does he follow me? Monica's throat tightened. I don't know. You must have some idea. Children don't develop fixations like this without reason. He's had trauma. He doesn't speak. He barely interacts with anyone, and then we came here and he. She trailed off, unsure how to explain what she herself didn't understand. It's like he recognizes you. We've never met before you started working here. I know that. Kwang Ho was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on Tawiya. Then he did something Monica didn't expect. He sat down on the bench beside her son, careful to leave space between them. How long has he been like this? He asked. 2 years. Since he was 13 months old. What happened? Monica's hands twisted in her lap. She never talked about that night. Not with the therapists who asked too many questions about details she wouldn't provide. Not with the church ladies who'd tried to help. Not with anyone. But something about the way Kwang Ho asked, with no emotion, no judgment, just a direct question expecting a direct answer, it made the words come. We lived in South LA. There was violence in the street outside our building. A shootout. Gang-related, the police said later. Glass broke. People screamed. Tawiya was in his crib by the window. Her voice steadied as she slipped into the factual recitation she'd given to the police. I ran to him. There was blood, his mine, I couldn't tell. The building was chaos. Everyone running. And then someone. She stopped. This was the part she'd never told anyone. Someone carried us out. A man. I never saw his face clearly. Everything was smoke and sirens, and I was holding Tawiya and trying to stop the bleeding. He wrapped my baby in something, a jacket, I think. And then he was gone. Kwang Ho had gone very still beside Tawiya. Tawiya stopped talking after that night, Monica continued. The doctors said selective mutism. Trauma response. They said he might speak again eventually, with therapy, with time. But it's been 2 years and nothing has worked until, she looked at Kwang Ho. Until he met you. What did this man look like? The one who carried you out. I told you I didn't see him. It was dark, there was smoke. Tall? Short? Build? I don't. Why does it matter? Kwang Ho didn't answer. He stood abruptly, his face carefully blank, and walked back toward the house without another word. Tawiya immediately scrambled off the bench to follow him, and Monica let him go, her mind spinning. There had been something in Kwang Ho's reaction, something in the way his whole body had tensed when she mentioned the jacket, that made her stomach twist with a feeling she couldn't name. That evening, after Tawiya was asleep, Monica couldn't settle. She paced their small room, her mind replaying the conversation in the garden, trying to understand Kwang Ho's questions. Why would he care about a random act of rescue during a gang shooting in South LA? What possible connection could he have to that night? Unless. The thought formed slowly, terribly. She moved to the small desk where she kept her laptop and opened it, her hands shaking slightly. She pulled up the news articles she'd saved from that night, April 17th, 3 years ago. She'd read them dozens of times, searching for meaning, for explanation. Asterisk gang violence erupts in South LA. 3 dead, 12 injured. Authorities suspect retaliation between rival organizations. Asterisk. She scrolled through the details she'd memorized. The location. The time. The description of 2 groups exchanging fire. And then, in one article from a Korean community newspaper she'd found weeks after the incident. Sources suggest involvement of Koreatown-based organization in South LA territorial dispute. Monica's breath caught. She clicked through to another article, then another, following links she'd never pursued before, digging into archives. Korean organized crime in Los Angeles. The Park family name appearing in police reports from the 1990s, always cleared, never charged. Kwang Ho's father, who died 5 years ago, mentioned in connection with business interests in South LA. No, it couldn't be. But Tawiya's response to Kwang Ho wasn't just attachment. It was recognition. Trauma imprints things strangely. She learned that in therapy. The brain holds onto fragments. A heartbeat, a voice, a feeling of being held during the worst moment of your life. Monica closed the laptop and pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to breathe. If Kwang Ho had been involved in that shooting, if his people had been the ones firing weapons in the street, then he wasn't just a dangerous man running a criminal empire. He was the reason her son had stopped speaking. He was the reason she'd bled on that apartment floor. He was the reason her entire life had narrowed to survival mode for 3 years. But he'd also carried them out. He'd wrapped her baby in his jacket. He'd made sure they survived. The contradiction was incomprehensible. Monstrous. Monica didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark listening to Tawiya's breathing and trying to decide what to do with the terrible suspicion growing in her chest. Confronting Kwang Ho could get her fired or worse. But pretending she didn't know, letting her son continue following a man who might have ordered the violence that broke him, felt like a betrayal she couldn't stomach. The next morning, she waited until Kwang Ho finished breakfast and returned to his office. Then she knocked. Come in. He was at his desk, reading something on his laptop. He didn't look up when she entered. I need to ask you something, Monica said, her voice steadier than she felt. Make it quick. I have a call in 5 minutes. Were you in South LA on April 17, 3 years ago? His hands stilled on the keyboard. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Then he looked up, and his eyes were completely empty of expression. Why are you asking me that? Were you there? Monica. He said her name like a warning. Drop this. My son was 13 months old. He doesn't remember what happened that night, but his body does. His brain does. And now he follows you around this house like he's trying to find something he lost, and I need to know, her voice cracked. I need to know if you're the reason he lost it. Kwang Ho closed the laptop slowly. He stood, moved to the window, looked out at the garden where Tawia was playing with Mrs. Chin. Yes, he said finally. I was there. The floor seemed to tilt. Monica grabbed the edge of the desk. Did you? Was it your people? The shooting. It was a territorial dispute. My father had interests in that area. Another organization moved in. It escalated. Did you order it? I approved the operation. His voice was flat, factual. My lieutenant was supposed to handle it cleanly. He didn't. The target area expanded. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. I didn't learn the extent of the damage until after. Monica couldn't breathe. She couldn't process the casual way he was admitting this. You're telling me that you're responsible for what happened to my son? I'm telling you that I approved an operation that resulted in collateral damage, including you and your son. Collateral damage? Her voice rose. He was a baby. I was just trying to keep him alive. We were collateral damage. Yes. Kwang Ho turned from the window, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression cracked, just slightly, just enough to show something beneath the control. But I also pulled you out. Both of you. I heard the infant crying. I went in. I carried you out of that building before the police arrived. You don't get credit for cleaning up your own destruction. I'm not asking for credit. His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. I'm stating facts. I caused harm. I also prevented death. Both things are true. Monica's hands were shaking so hard she had to press them against her sides. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me work here, let Tawia follow you around, when you knew? I didn't know at first. The boy following me was strange, but I get strange things happening in this house all the time. It wasn't until you told me about the timeline, about the man who carried you out, that I started to suspect. And then I checked my records from that night and confirmed it. When? When did you confirm it? Last night. Monica laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. So you've known for less than 24 hours that you destroyed my son's life, and you're just, what? Standing here telling me like you're discussing the weather. What would you like me to do? Kwang Ho's voice was still quiet, still controlled, but something in it had sharpened. Would you like me to apologize? Would that change anything? Would it give your son his voice back? Would it erase the trauma? It might show that you're capable of basic human decency. I'm not interested in performing decency to make you feel better. You want to know if I regret approving that operation? Yes. I regret the civilian casualties. I regret that my lieutenant exceeded his orders. I regret that I didn't review the damage reports thoroughly enough to know exactly what had happened until now. But apologies are empty. What matters is what I do next. And what are you going to do next? Monica's voice was acid. Write me a check? Fire the lieutenant who exceeded his orders? None of that fixes what you broke. No, Kwang Ho agreed. It doesn't. They stood in the office, the morning light slanting through the windows, and Monica felt something in her chest collapse under the weight of understanding. Her son had been following the man who'd ordered the violence that had shattered his world, but also the man who'd held him steady when the world was breaking. Both things were true, and she didn't know what to do with that. I want to quit, she said. I want to take Tawia and leave this house and never see you again. Then quit. But I can't afford to, because I need this job. I need the health insurance for his therapy. I need the salary that's double what I'd make anywhere else. And I hate that I need anything from you, but I do. Kwang Ho nodded once, as if this confirmed something he'd already known. Then we have a problem. We don't have a problem. I have a problem. You have the luxury of not caring. You're wrong about that. He moved back to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a thin folder. He placed it on the desk between them. These are the police reports from that night. The full versions, not the public summaries. I obtained them yesterday. The lieutenant who escalated the operation was Du Yejuan. He's been with my organization for 7 years. He's also the one responsible for my South LA operations. Monica didn't touch the folder. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to know exactly what happened. And because I'm going to dismantle those operations. What? South LA is profitable, but it's also unstable. Too many civilian interfaces. Too much potential for incidents like the one that hurt your son. I should have shut it down years ago. I'm doing it now. I'm not asking you to restructure your criminal empire because of me. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Kwang Ho's voice was firm. This isn't redemption. I can't redeem what I've done, but I can prevent it from happening again. And I can make sure the person responsible for that specific operation faces consequences. Monica's mind was reeling. What kind of consequences? The kind that ensure he never makes strategic decisions again. The implication hung in the air, and Monica felt cold despite the warm morning. This was the reality of the world Kwang Ho inhabited, a world where consequences didn't mean firing someone or pressing charges, but something much more final. I don't want you to kill anyone because of me, she said. I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because he endangered my operations with his sloppiness. You and Tawia are just the example that made me finally acknowledge the problem. You're a monster. The words came out flat, exhausted. Yes, Kwang Ho agreed. I am. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't trying to soften it. He just accepted the label and moved on, as if they were discussing something as mundane as his breakfast preferences. Monica picked up the folder, held it for a moment, then set it back down without opening it. I can't read this. I can't look at reports that detail how my son got hurt. But I need you to tell me one thing truthfully. What? When you carried us out that night, did you know we were there because of your operation? Or did you just stumble on us? Kwang Ho considered the question. I knew there was civilian presence in the building. I'd heard the chaos reports. When I heard the infant crying, I made a choice to go in. So yes, I knew the violence was connected to my operation. But no, I didn't know specifically who you were or what had happened to you until I saw you. And if you'd known? If you'd known that we were hurt because of your orders, would you still have left before the police came? Yes. I couldn't afford to be linked to the scene. The honesty was brutal. Monica felt it like a physical blow. But I made sure you were stable first, Kwang Ho added. I stopped the bleeding where I could. I positioned you where the paramedics would find you immediately. I didn't just dump you and run. How compassionate of you. I'm not claiming compassion. I'm stating what I did. Monica turned toward the door, needing to leave before she said something irreversible, but Kwang Ho's next words stopped her. Your son recognized my heartbeat. She turned back. What? When I carried him that night, he was unconscious, but his body was against my chest. Infants imprint on rhythms. Heartbeat, breathing, voice patterns. Trauma makes those imprints stronger. That's why he follows me. That's why he calmed down when I demonstrated breathing during his panic attack. His unconscious mind remembers being held by someone with this specific physiological signature during a moment of extreme stress. Monica's eyes burned. You researched this. I looked up trauma responses in infants last night after you told me your story. I wanted to understand the mechanism. Why? Because I don't believe in mysteries. Everything has an explanation. That's not an explanation. That's a rationalization. You're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, that a child who was hurt by your violence somehow finds comfort in your presence. Yes, Kwang Ho said simply. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. They stood in the office, the morning stretching into afternoon, and Monica understood with terrible clarity that nothing about this situation would ever be simple. She couldn't hate him cleanly because he'd saved Tawia's life. She couldn't forgive him because he'd endangered it first. She couldn't leave because she needed the resources he provided. She couldn't stay without confronting this truth every single day. I don't know what to do, she said finally, and her voice broke on the words. Neither do I, Kwang Ho admitted. But if you choose to stay, I'll make sure Tawiya gets the best trauma therapy available. Not the free clinic. Specialists. Whatever he needs. I don't want your guilt money. It's not guilt money. It's practical resource allocation. Your son needs help. I can provide it. That's not emotion, it's problem solving. Monica wanted to scream at him that not everything was a problem to be solved, that some things required actual human feeling to address, that his cold pragmatism was almost worse than if he'd been defensive or apologetic. But she was too tired, too overwhelmed, too trapped. I need to think, she said. Take your time. She left the office and found Tawiya in the garden, playing with Mrs. Chen. Her son looked up when she approached, and his eyes, so observant, so aware despite his silence, seemed to ask a question she didn't know how to answer. Do we stay or do we go? That night, Monica couldn't sleep again. She lay in the dark and tried to imagine leaving. Finding another job. Losing the health insurance. Returning to the free clinic where the therapists were overworked and underfunded and couldn't give Tawiya the specialized attention he needed. Moving to a cheaper apartment. Starting over. Then she tried to imagine staying. Working for a man who'd admitted causing the violence that had broken her son. Watching Tawiya follow that man around the house, seeking comfort from the person who'd created his trauma in the first place. Both options felt impossible. Around 2 a.m., she heard footsteps in the hallway outside their room, the main house hallway, not the servants' wing. Curious, she eased out of bed and cracked open the door. Kwang Ho was walking toward his office, fully dressed despite the hour. And Tawiya was following him. Monica's heart stopped. She'd put Tawiya to bed hours ago. How had he gotten out of their room? How had he navigated through the dark house to find Kwang Ho? She watched as Kwang Ho reached his office door and paused. He looked down at Tawiya for a long moment, then did something Monica had never seen him do. He crouched to the child's level. You should be asleep, he said quietly. Tawiya, of course, said nothing. I'm going to be working for several hours. It will be boring. You won't enjoy watching. No response. Kwang Ho sighed. Then he stood, opened the office door, and held it. An invitation. Tawiya walked inside. Monica should have intervened. Should have swept in and taken her son back to bed and established boundaries. But something kept her frozen in the doorway, watching. Through the open office door, she could see Kwang Ho settling behind his desk and Tawiya sitting on the floor in the corner, his toy car in his hands. No interaction. No conversation. Just the child and the man existing in the same space, and somehow that being enough. Monica retreated to her room and lay awake until dawn, trying to understand what she'd witnessed. It wasn't affection, Kwang Ho didn't show affection. But it was accommodation. Acceptance. A reshaping of his environment to include this small, silent presence. In the morning, she found Tawiya asleep on a blanket in Kwang Ho's office, the toy car still clutched in his hand. Kwang Ho was at his desk, working, and he looked up when Monica entered. He fell asleep around 4, Kwang Ho said. I didn't want to wake him. Monica picked up her son carefully. He stirred but didn't wake, settling against her shoulder with the trust that only sleeping children possess. We're staying, she said. Kwang Ho nodded once. I'll make arrangements for the therapy. Dr. Sarah Chen at UCLA. She specializes in selective mutism and early childhood trauma. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is the minimum requirement of the situation. Monica carried Tawiya back to their room, and as she settled him into bed, she realized that she'd made a choice that would define everything going forward. She was staying in the house of the man who'd harmed her son. She was accepting his resources. She was allowing Tawiya to continue seeking comfort from him. She didn't know if it was the right choice. She only knew it was the one she could survive. The weeks that followed developed a strange rhythm. Dr. Chen started seeing Tawia twice a week. The sessions were gentle, play-based, focused on building trust and creating safe spaces for expression. Monica attended every session, taking notes, learning techniques. At home, Tawia continued following Kwang Ho. But now there were boundaries, specific times when Kwang Ho worked undisturbed, specific spaces Tawia couldn't enter. Kwang Ho implemented them with the same clinical precision he applied to everything, and Tawia, surprisingly, adapted. Monica watched it all with a mixture of fascination and horror. Kwang Ho wasn't warm. He didn't play with Tawia. He didn't speak to him much beyond practical statements. But he was steady, predictable. And Tawia responded to that steadiness like a plant responds to sunlight, growing toward it, needing it. Then Yuri Sian returned. She arrived unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, her Chanel suit replaced by a silk dress that probably cost more than Monica made in 3 months. She swept into the house and found Kwang Ho in the living room, reviewing documents with one of his associates. "We need to talk," she announced, dismissing the associate with a look. Kwang Ho glanced up, his expression neutral. About your recent business decisions. My father says you've been restructuring South LA operations, pulling out of profitable areas. He's concerned. Your father's concerns are noted. Kwang Ho. Yuri's voice sharpened. This isn't a joke. These decisions affect our future. When we're married, your business becomes our business. I need to understand why you're suddenly making changes that don't make strategic sense. They make sense to me. Based on what analysis? What metrics are you using? I'm reducing civilian interface points. It's a liability issue. Yuri's eyes narrowed. Since when do you care about civilians? The question hung in the air, and Monica, who was arranging flowers in the adjacent room but could hear every word, felt her chest tighten. Kwang Ho stood slowly. I care about operational efficiency. Civilian casualties create police attention. Police attention creates problems. I'm eliminating problems. That's not what this is about. Yuri moved closer, her voice dropping. This is about that maid and her damaged child. You're letting them influence you. Monica and her son have nothing to do with my business decisions. Liar. Yuri's voice was cold now. I've been watching. I see how you accommodate that boy. How you let him trail after you like a pet. It's weak, Kwang Ho. It makes you look weak. What makes me look weak is having this conversation. Then end it. Fire her. Remove the distraction. Get back to the man I agreed to marry, the one who doesn't let sentiment interfere with profit. In the adjacent room, Monica's hands stilled on the flowers. She should leave. She shouldn't be hearing this. But she couldn't move. No, Kwang Ho said. No, I'm not firing Monica. And I'm not discussing this further. You're choosing a maid over me? I'm choosing to run my organization the way I see fit. Your father doesn't control my decisions. You don't control my decisions. If that's a problem, we can reconsider the engagement. The silence that followed was absolute. Monica heard Yuri's sharp intake of breath, then the click of her heels against marble as she left. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Monica set down the flowers and moved to the doorway. Kwang Ho was standing in the living room, staring at nothing, his hands clenched at his sides. You didn't have to do that, Monica said quietly. He turned. Do what? Defend me to her. Defend Tawia. I wasn't defending you. I was establishing boundaries. There's a difference. Is there? Kwang Ho's jaw tightened. Yuri wants to control how I run my organization. That's not acceptable. This has nothing to do with you, doesn't it? He didn't answer, and Monica understood that they were both lying. It had everything to do with her and Tawia. It had everything to do with the fact that Kwang Ho had started making different choices, and those choices couldn't be rationalized away as pure strategy anymore. That night, gunfire erupted outside the mansion. Monica jerked awake to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. Her training from South LA kicked in immediately. She rolled out of bed, grabbed Tawia from his crib, and dropped to the floor beside it, covering his body with hers. Tawia was rigid in her arms, his breathing already accelerating into panic. Monica pressed her hand over his ear, trying to muffle the sounds, whispering desperately, "Mama's here, baby. Mama's got you. You're safe." But he wasn't safe. Neither of them were safe. The gunfire was close, in the garden, maybe, or the driveway. Men were shouting in Korean. Glass was breaking. The door to their room burst open. Monica looked up, terrified, and found Kwang Ho in the doorway. He had a gun in his hand and blood on his shirt, his or someone else's, she couldn't tell. "Can you move?" he asked, his voice clipped and urgent. "What's happening?" "Retaliation for the South LA pullout. There are 4 of them. My people are handling it, but you need to get to the safe room. Now." He moved into the room, and Monica saw that the blood was from a cut on his arm, shallow but bleeding steadily. Behind him, the hallway was dark except for emergency lighting. "Where's the safe room?" "Follow me. Stay low." Monica clutched Tawia and followed Kwang Ho into the hallway, her heart hammering. More gunfire sounded from outside, followed by a heavy crash. Tawia was shaking in her arms, his breath coming in rapid, shallow gasps. Kwang Ho led them to what Monica had thought was a coat closet. He pressed his palm against a sensor, and the back wall slid open, revealing a small reinforced room with surveillance monitors and emergency supplies. Inside, he ordered. Monica stumbled in with Tawia. Mrs. Chin was already there, along with 2 other staff members Monica recognized. They looked terrified but unharmed. Kwang Ho started to close the door, but Tawia suddenly twisted in Monica's arms and reached toward him, making a sound, not words, but a cry, desperate and raw. Kwang Ho froze. "He'll be fine," Monica said quickly. "Just go, handle whatever you need to." Tawia's cry grew louder, more desperate. His small hands grasped at the air between him and Kwang Ho, and his whole body was trembling. Kwang Ho looked at the child for a long moment. Then he looked at his gun, at the hallway behind him where his people were fighting, at all the practical, strategic reasons he should close this door and return to the crisis. And then he stepped inside the safe room and let the door close behind him. "What are you doing?" Monica asked. "Your people. My people can handle 4 attackers. They've handled worse." He moved to the surveillance monitors, checking feeds. "We'll know in 15 minutes if they need me." Monica didn't know what to say. The man who ran a criminal empire, who made decisions based on cold strategy, had just abandoned his position during an attack to stay in a safe room with his staff. With Tawia. Kwang Ho crouched in front of the boy, who was still shaking in Monica's arms. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to that same steady tone he'd used during Tawia's panic attacks. "This is not the same as before. You're not in that apartment. You're in my house, in a safe room with walls that can't be breached. The sounds you're hearing are outside. They can't reach you here." Tawia's breathing was still rapid, but his eyes were locked on Kwang Ho's face. "Watch me," Kwang Ho continued. "In. Out. In. Out." He demonstrated breathing again, slow and exaggerated. Tawia's chest started to match the rhythm, his panic gradually subsiding into something more controlled. Monica felt tears sliding down her face. She didn't know if they were from fear or stress, or the surreal tenderness of watching a crime lord talk her traumatized son through a panic attack while literal gunfire rattled outside. The surveillance monitors showed Kwang Ho's security team subduing the attackers. It took 12 minutes, not 15. When the last attacker was down and the all-clear signal came through, Kwang Ho stood. "It's finished," he said. "You can return to your rooms once my people have cleared the area." He moved toward the door, and Tawia's hand shot out, grabbing the hem of his shirt. Kwang Ho looked down at this small hand, clutching his blood-stained shirt. Then he looked at Monica, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his expression that might have been uncertainty. "He'll let go in a moment," Monica said softly. "Will he?" They waited. Tawia's grip didn't loosen. "Or I can stay," Kwang Ho said finally. "Until he's ready." So he stayed. He sat on the floor of the safe room while his people cleaned up the attack outside, while the police were called and paid off, while the evidence was erased. He sat with his back against the wall, and Tawia eventually migrated from Monica's arms to sit beside him, not touching, just close. And Monica watched them and understood that something fundamental had shifted. Kwang Ho had made a choice, and a logical, strategically questionable choice, to stay with a traumatized child instead of managing his crisis. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. The next morning, Du Yejuan was found dead in his apartment. The official report said heart attack. Kwang Ho's people knew better. Monica heard about it from Mrs. Chin, who whispered the news while preparing breakfast. The lieutenant who ran South LA operations. The one who was always too aggressive. He's gone. Monica's hands went cold. She found Kwang Ho in his office an hour later. "Did you kill him?" she asked without preamble. Kwang Ho looked up from his laptop. "No. I had him removed from operational decision-making. What happened after that was between him and my board of directors." That's a semantic distinction. It's an accurate one. I didn't personally kill him, but I created the circumstances that led to his death, so if you want to hold me responsible, I accept that responsibility. Monica sank into the chair across from his desk. "You killed someone because of what happened to Tawia. I removed someone because he was a liability to my organization. What happened to Tawia was simply the clearest example of that liability. Stop hiding behind logic. You had him killed because you felt guilty." Kwang Ho's expression didn't change. "I don't feel guilt. I feel the need to correct operational inefficiencies. Du Yejuan was inefficient. He's been corrected. You're a monster. You've said that before." "It's still true." Monica laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged. "How am I supposed to process this? How am I supposed to let my son bond with someone who casually orders people's deaths like he's ordering lunch? You're not supposed to process it. You're supposed to decide if you can live with it. If you can't, then leave. I'll provide references. I'll ensure you find equivalent employment. But if you stay, you do so knowing exactly who I am and what I do. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Everything else is just emotion clouding the basic choice." Monica wanted to scream at him that emotion wasn't cloud, that it was the entire point, that his ability to separate feeling from action was exactly what made him dangerous. But she was too tired, too overwhelmed, too aware that despite everything, she didn't want to leave. Because Tawia was getting better. Dr. Chin had noticed it too. In their last session, she'd commented on his increased responsiveness, his willingness to engage with play therapy, his reduced startle responses. The progress was slow but undeniable. And Monica knew, hated knowing but couldn't deny, that part of that progress was because of Kwang Ho. Because of the steady, predictable presence that Tawia's traumatized brain had latched onto as safe. "I can't leave," she said finally. "Not while Tawia is improving. Then stay. But I need you to understand something." Monica leaned forward, her voice fierce. "I'm not staying because I forgive you. I'm not staying because I think you're a good person. I'm staying because my son needs help, and you're providing resources I can't get anywhere else. That's all this is. Understood?" And if you ever put him in danger again, if your world ever touches him the way it did 3 years ago, I will take him and disappear. I don't care about references or equivalent employment. I will vanish and you'll never find us. Kwang Ho nodded slowly. I believe you. Good. She stood to leave, but his voice stopped her. Monica. What? For what it's worth, I meant what I said about the safe room last night. He is safer in my house than he would be almost anywhere else. I've made sure of that. Monica didn't respond. She just left, closing the door quietly behind her. The months that followed were strange. Tawiah continued therapy. The progress was incremental but steady, longer attention spans, fewer panic attacks, small attempts at vocalization during play therapy sessions. Dr. Chin was cautiously optimistic. At home, the dynamic between Kwang Ho and Tawiah settled into something almost routine. Tawiah still followed him, but now there were activities. Kwang Ho would work while Tawiah drew at a small table in the corner of the office. They'd eat breakfast in the same room, not speaking, just existing in parallel. Monica watched it all and didn't know what to feel. Kwang Ho never tried to be affectionate. He never played or cooed or did any of the things typical adults did with children. But he was present, reliable, and somehow that was enough for Tawiah. Yuri stopped visiting. The engagement, according to staff gossip, was on hold. Monica didn't ask Kwang Ho about it, and he didn't volunteer information. Then, 6 months after the attack on the mansion, Tawiah spoke. It happened during a therapy session. Dr. Chin was using puppets to act out a scenario about feelings, and Tawiah, who usually just watched, suddenly grabbed the puppet from her hand and said, clearly, "No." Monica, watching from the observation room, burst into tears. Dr. Chin kept her expression calm and professional, but her eyes were bright. "No? You don't want the puppet to do that." Tawiah nodded. Then, quieter, "No." One word. But it was a word. It was his voice after 2.5 years of silence. That evening, Monica brought Tawiah to Kwang Ho's office. He was working, as usual, and looked up when they entered. He spoke today, Monica said. In therapy. Kwang Ho's hands stilled on his keyboard. What did he say? No, just one word. But he said it clearly. Intentionally. Kwang Ho looked at Tawiah, and something crossed his face, too quick to fully identify, but it looked almost like relief. That's good, he said quietly. Tawiah walked across the office and stopped in front of Kwang Ho's desk. He looked up at the man who'd saved him and broken him and somehow existed in his life as both. Ajushi, he said. The word hung in the air. It was Korean uncle, or a respectful term for an adult man. Monica didn't know where Tawiah had learned it. Maybe from hearing Kwang Ho's staff. Maybe from some deep place in his memory where languages lived. Kwang Ho's expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for Monica to see the impact. He closed his laptop slowly and gave Tawiah his complete attention. Yes, he said. Tawiah considered for a moment. Then, carefully, like he was choosing words from a limited collection, you didn't drop me. The silence that followed was complete. Monica's breath caught. She didn't know how Tawiah knew this, what fragment of memory or sensation his brain had held onto from that night 3 years ago. But somehow he knew. He knew that during the chaos and the violence and the breaking glass, someone had held him steady. Someone hadn't let him fall. Kwang Ho's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was rough. No, he said. I didn't drop you. Tawiah nodded, as if this confirmed something important. Then he turned and walked back to Monica, slipping his hand into hers. Monica looked at Kwang Ho over her son's head. His face had returned to its usual careful blankness, but his hands were gripping the edge of his desk with enough force to whiten his knuckles. Thank you, she said. Not for the resources. Not for the therapy. Just, thank you. Kwang Ho nodded once. Then he opened his laptop and returned to work, and Monica took Tawia back to their room. But that night, lying in bed while Tawia slept peacefully beside her, Monica allowed herself to acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding for months. Kwang Ho had caused terrible harm. But he'd also prevented irreparable damage. He'd made choices, cold, strategic choices, that prioritized containment over escalation. He'd restructured his organization. He'd provided resources. He'd stayed in a safe room during an attack because a traumatized child needed him to. It wasn't redemption. He didn't get to be redeemed. But it was responsibility. And maybe, in a world as complicated as theirs, responsibility was enough. The story doesn't end with resolution. Monica continues working in the mansion. Tawia continues therapy, his vocabulary slowly expanding. Kwang Ho continues running his organization, but with different parameters now, civilian interface minimized, operations restructured, violent escalations controlled. They exist in an uncomfortable truth. Harm can't be erased. But the person who caused it can choose what they do after understanding it. And sometimes, a 3-year-old with a healing voice teaches everyone involved that the world isn't divided cleanly into monsters and heroes. Sometimes it's just people making choices, and those choices rippling outward in ways no one fully controls. Tawia still follows Kwang Ho through the mansion. But now he talks while he does it. Small observations, simple sentences, growing confidence. And Kwang Ho listens. Not because it makes him good, but because it's what comes after knowing. If you've made it this far, you've witnessed something rare, a story that refuses to simplify the complexity of harm and healing. This isn't about quick fixes or easy forgiveness. It's about the long, uncomfortable work of choosing responsibility over denial. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on whether redemption is possible or if responsibility is all we can really ask for. And like this video if you appreciate storytelling that doesn't take the easy way out. Because the truth is messy. And sometimes, messy is the only honest way to tell it. ****